Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another of the 2260 PD series, Teacher PD series. And today's session, specifically, we are looking at the idea of meaning making within teaching and how our teachers go about trying to unpack their subjects or parts of their subject. And to do that, we have a cast of thousands that have come along and graciously given up some of their time to talk about their own experiences, their own strategies. And so I'm joined, hopefully you can see my screen at the moment. Is that being shared, audience? Excellent, thank you. I'm joined by Kim Bailey, Hayley McEwen. I'm not sure if Nick's in yet. He might be joining us in a minute. We've got Kartika Pillai, we've got Brendan Tyrosh, and Nicole Mitchell, all from a variety of different backgrounds, schools, disciplines, sharing some of their insights into how they go about making meaning and why it's important, why it's cropped up. I actually have a bit of an exercise to kick things off, which is going to be pretty funny because it's predominantly the presenters who are with us this morning, but I don't see a reason why they can't join in the fun. But to get us thinking in this space, I have a very short activity, very short Menti activity that I'm going to drop the link in the chat pod too. And that activity really is asking us to think a little bit about how we feel about our own teaching, how effectively we address the following 4 areas. And so what our participants will be looking at is the idea around 4 different areas that either they're doing it or they're doing it a lot or anywhere in between. One of them being clarifying expectations that students have, such as around attendance, participation, workload, etc. Another being expectations of the academic, what they're doing or what they're bringing to the subject. And I can see those results starting to come on in. Thank you both. I mean, all of you. It's not just, there's more than 2 people. And third one being any given assessment. Do you take time to look at ways to actually address the task or perhaps where to start? And lastly, identifying the relationships between the subject, the overall course the student might be in, and the real world, profession outside. And I can see that people have a pretty good feeling about how they're doing those things currently, which is great, probably why they're presenting today as well, by and large. But I would encourage you, if you're watching the recording, to dwell on this yourself about what you're doing, whether you take the time to do these things explicitly or not. And notice that in the question, I've specifically called out the subject outline and whether or not you're able to say confidently that you're doing these things apart from pointing to the subject outline. All that information is in the subject outline because we certainly hear that explanation provided. At times, it is a legal document. I've heard that expression used. It is the source of truth for this subject. It contains all the information you need to make it through this subject. And if that were true, then obviously our progression rates, our attrition, etc., the statistics would tell a slightly different story. So dwell on those a little bit if you're watching the recording, but thank you for those of you who've contributed to these stats. So look, the way I've organized things today, I've also put in a slight definition, I suppose, or explanation around the term meaning making, how we make sense of knowledge, experience, relationships in the self. It's quite an interesting article, quite short if you want to look up Ignelzi, his piece on meaning making. He ties it to learning and teaching theory later, but that's where we're starting from. And before I hand over to the first of our speakers, what I've really asked each of our educators to consider is how do they feel about their job in terms of making sense of assessment or learning materials or activities or the actual learning experience in their subject. Is that part of your job as an academic, as a teacher in a subject? If it is, how do you go about it? So that's a bit of context. So to kick things off, I'm going to hand over to Hayley McEwen from the Centre for Law and Justice. I know Hayley teaches into a couple of other disciplines as well. And I would love Hayley, firstly, to tell me before I hand things over to you. Which of these three areas do you feel you'll be talking about this morning, Hayley?
I think I'm going to be talking about assessment, Lachlan.
Excellent.
We
And
get to click on it? No.
we don't get to click on it. No, I wish I was that organized. Maybe that'll be the next time I run it. It'll open up something.
I'm picturing a Sesame Street themed. Which window will you choose?
Absolutely. Or a play school. Which window are we looking in today?
Sorry.
That would
That's
also
what
be
I meant.
good. No, I get you. Now, if you'd like to share your screen at all when you're talking about things, you're more than welcome to, Hayley, or if you'd like to talk,
Okay,
but
sure.
I can stop sharing if that would help.
Yeah, let me just grab my screen then. Okay, these are really, really brief slides here, but really I was going to be talking about making meaning from an assessment that focuses on short answer questions, because in some of my teaching, I've found that students are really used to doing multiple choice tests, whether it's formative or summative assessment. We often spend a lot of time focused on preparing them for the larger items like problem questions or essay questions. And I think sometimes there's a bit of an assumption that they know how to approach short answer questions, but it's an area that I see them struggle with often in exams. And I think one of the issues that I've seen, just coming to the next slide, is that in the areas I teach in particular, because it's law, there's often quite heavy content that we need to assess. And so students can really struggle to distill the very key principles and also move beyond just identifying one element of an answer to make it a fuller answer that we're looking for. And so I'm going to just talk really briefly. What have I got? How long have I got, Lachlan? Sorry, maybe.
I think you've basically got between 5 to 10.
Yep, great. Yeah, really briefly about two examples of how I've tried to address this in quite different subjects. So in a paramedic law and ethics subject, so we're dealing with paramedic students for whom law is an entirely new language, new area for them. And then a law subject as well, equity and trusts. So I think it's often what I've found is I'm using short answer questions to try to distill some of the heavier content to engage students in focusing on key concepts, but then also building better skills in the way that they develop their answers. So in paramedic law and ethics, previously, so up until this year, the legal content was assessed by a legal task, sort of a legal essay, a little bit of a problem scenario in there. But because the law was so new to these students, and of course they taught it over a number of weeks, they really struggled with bringing in the combination of identifying what those key principles are and then applying them in a way that was useful to a scenario. And so it was quite evident that marks dropped in that task. And then when they were called to answer short answer type questions in an exam on the legal content, they were doing a little bit better at that, but when they were again asked to apply a key legal concept in another a problem type question in the exam, they often left out the law part altogether, even though they could have drawn on that key concept if they'd known it well and identified it. So I went back to basics this time around and have asked them to have sought to assess the legal knowledge instead of in this problem type scenario in some short answer questions. But I think we've got to put a lot of groundwork in really in preparing students for that task. And so that involves using, of course, sample type questions, preparing them in classes though through discussion. So rather than just a direct instruction, here's a way that you can go about answering a short answer question. That's important. But starting from basics in really simple terms like tell me in your words what your understanding of blah is, of this particular concept. And so engaging that kind of discussion where they feel it's really low stakes, there's more trust built up in the classroom and people can throw different ideas around, and then helping them put those ideas together to build out a fuller answer. And so I wanted to just, give you a little bit of an insight into how I did this also in a law subject in our residential school last year. So the PHC 190, they're yet to get to that short answer legal test. So I can't tell you how it's gone. That'll be an update I can give you later on. But I am working with them week by week as we're building on the content in working through certain questions that model the type that they'll see in that test. Now, in equity and trusts, it is one of our pre-C 11 law subjects, so all students doing the Bachelor of Laws need to study it. And this is something that I trialled in our residential school program, where it was all held over Zoom, recorded. It wasn't a compulsory activity, so the residential school itself, students can choose whether they come to it or not. And I wanted to, rather than just again focusing on the direct instruction of this is how you can answer a short answer question, get them more involved and build some collegiality as well. So if anyone's gone to an F45 class, you'll be familiar with the idea of how things run in different pods. And I was picturing this in my head one day thinking, I love the thing about F45 is it's never boring because you move from one pod to the next and you're doing a slightly different exercise activity at each pod, but there's very little rest in between them. And I picture this a little bit like students in an exam when they're getting to a particular section and they know they're on a timer and they have to just keep going. So I called this an E45 pipeline, and an F45 pipeline is described as this: as virtually zero rest in this session as you tackle oncoming sets of 9 waves over and over. There's nowhere to hide in the whitewash of your heart as your heart rate will soar and stay there for the entire 45 minutes. Watch the heart rate monitors as pipeline produces incredible results with over 850 calories burnt in the session. So I said to students, I'm going to split you into groups, and I'm going to throw a short answer question at you into the chat every 3 minutes. So it's 45 minutes. I spent a good 5 to 10 minutes on instructions. This is what I'm looking for, giving quite specific directions. There were about 4 students in each group or each pod. And I said, together, you're to formulate what you think would be a really good answer to this question within that 3 minutes. And then you'll get another question. So keep the notes. And then at the end, we came back and as a class discussed the answer that each group had put forward to each question. So then it was roughly 2 to 3 minutes discussion on each question at the end, and we could compile what we thought was a really full answer. So in doing that, I didn't realize, but really we were modeling what I thought was good practice in answering short answer questions by saying, okay, that's one element of it, that's definition, but how could you build on that? Where was that from? Is there a case that's relevant? Is there a piece of legislation? Are there any exceptions? So that they can build out something more than a 1 sentence into a 2 to 3 good sentence structure. So my key message to take away is in this sort of short answer assessment or modelling, it's really important to give clear instructions. And I think a large part of that is how many sentences or sorts of number of words you're looking for, to provide if they're you're looking for a couple of things in the question, to split the question into parts so that they know there's 2 or 3 components that they need to address. Start small in the way you're modeling it. So like I said, often a class discussion rather than just asking someone to produce their answer, and then offer comparisons of different sorts of answers and how a fuller answer might address the elements you're looking for, and then provide that constant feedback. So that's it from me.
Great. Thank you very much, Hayley. I feel slightly tired hearing the exercise analogy in that space and what that might do to me, but I understand it was just an analogy and not me in an F45 class.
And they actually had a lot of fun. They liked it. Yeah.
Excellent. I like the pressure cooker idea as a strategy, I suppose, in a way to see what it can get out when people work together like that. That sounds very interesting. So thank you, Hayley McEwen. I'm going to hand over straight away to our next speaker for today, which is Nicole Mitchell. And Nicole, are you right to share your screen? Can you tell us firstly which of the three areas you're going to be looking at today?
Sorry. Yep. I'll be looking at kind of all of them, but very quickly. Just from my background, so I'm an educational designer and I teach as a sessional lecturer as well. So, which kind of makes it cool because one informs the other. So can you see my screen?
We can.
I had to laugh when I saw your opening slide, Hayley. We're on the same wavelength with the scaffolding patterns. When you asked me about this, Lachlan, I started to think about some of the things that I come across, especially as a educational designer, when we get handed over a subject to look at, to rework, to review, to improve. One of the big things I look for is that consistency of language. And I've actually encountered this as a lecturer myself when I've been given as a subject coordinator, a subject outline. I'm going, oh, okay, I do not know what's going on here. It mentions tools for strategic planning and marketing, but I can't see that word anywhere in the content or in the assessment tasks. What's going on? So that real thing about making sure you have that consistency of language. It's not really exciting, and we know as practitioners we often use words interchangeably, but the students may not have that cognitive capital yet to understand that. So to have the subject learning outcomes, the assessment tasks, and the topic and what we're doing in class all connected and using that consistency. So one subject I worked on was Biz 114. So I'll just show you what we did. Basically was, okay, so say, for example, this one here, this subject learning outcome was to identify personal examples of key employability skills, evaluate where personal skills require development, and create a plan of action to show how skills will be developed. So that's one there. So if you look at that, immediately you can see, sorry, I need to get my annotation tool out now. You can see where we've got, some key themes here, employability skills and the plan of action. You can kind of start to predict, and often students will, that's the first thing they look, what am I going to learn in this subject? Oh, and they start to think, what assessment tasks am I going to be doing? So when you're using that kind of the same language throughout, it makes it much easier for students to understand. So sorry, I'm a bit out of practice here with my annotation, having been away. Okay, so sorry, I'll just clear that. Okay, so what we've got then is, so we've got the learning outcomes. You can see employability skills. You can see it straight away in the list of assessment tasks, which is the students would be looking for. And then when we look, this is a screen grab from the Interact 2 site, we've got it there, and they'll probably go, oh yeah, and there's probably something I need to do here with this to do that last assessment task. So what you can see is that real link, constructive alignment between all those elements. Now, like I said, that's sort of like probably telling you how to suck eggs, because it sort of makes common sense, but it's amazing how many subjects I do get to work on where that's not the case. And it's like the treasure hunt you were showing before, Lachlan. We're going, what do I do with this stuff? So let's just make it easy for students to not make the assessment tasks easy, but make it easy for them to do the assessment tasks well through that, having that alignment and that clarity for them. And I do think that it's definitely our role to unpack that. The other thing that I like to do is to, is to also, this is one of the things I do when I'm mapping out subjects, is to kind of make a bit of a visual of how the content, especially with this particular subject that had lots of bits and pieces, and it was a brand new subject and we don't have a textbook. For me, in my mind, I need to have a conceptual model to see where everything fits, and through fleshing that out, I work out where everything fits, and then we share that with students and we refer to it throughout the session. The other thing that's been I've had very good feedback from students about was yes, we do need to model. And Hayley, you mentioned that too in your presentation about modeling answers. So sometimes they don't know what things are supposed to look like, or maybe they don't really know what to do or how to tackle something. And so what I started doing is to actually use the document camera this is in face-to-face classes, obviously, but you could do it same in Zoom with annotation, is to show students live and draw and write all over the subject outline. and the assessment tasks to unpack them. And then, of course, I save it as a PDF, and then I put it in the assessment folder for them, and also remind them that it's there in the announcement. So again, you've got that consistent messaging. So that's probably a bit small. So here's sort of example. So as I'm talking them through the assessment task, I'm highlighting, I'm scribbling notes. They're all frantically writing their things. Usually I just copy that assessment task for them. Sometimes I have to take pens because some students don't bring pens to class. I don't know if anyone has that problem. But they end up walking away with with lots of notes. And of course, that also facilitates then if they have any questions, I can clarify it as we go step by step through these assessment tasks. And as a result, I did find that the students who did attend that class where I ran that, live, they did have a much better, they were much more on point in terms of their assessment tasks. There was less confusion there, and they really produced better results, I think. And then the last thing is that scaffolding in class activity. So a lot of the subjects I teach, there's a capstone strategic marketing subject, and even in the first year marketing subject as well, students will choose a business or organization they're interested in for their assessment tasks. That's the same one throughout the session. So immediately I'll tell the students, look, and this is the how to do well slide for one of those subjects, is come to class because the business or organization that you've chosen for your assessment task, they're going to be the examples that we're going to be using. So the great thing about that is because they vary greatly. We've had gyms, charities, I usually try to talk them out of doing Apple because it's just too big, but we've had Tesla, we've had the same thing, but we have a huge variety of businesses. And it makes it really easy as a lecturer because you have instant examples. Sometimes you get stuck and you can't think of a good example. Immediately you look at Luke, and yes, he did Total Tool, so that's a good example. But the other thing we do is I get students to help each other. So okay, so Lucy, you're doing the childcare centre, but what do you think Total Tools could do, and vice versa? So we workshop, and we kind of workshop the assessments and the businesses, and apply the theories, because that strategic marketing is, as the name implies, quite heavy with theory on different strategies and strategic approaches and so on. It's a great way for them to develop their understanding, and as a lecturer to come up with a great number of examples that you can call on, and the students get to also discuss things further. So I do always say that, and they are our case studies that we will use in class. So that means it's also an extra incentive to come to class, because you're not getting the answers, but you're doing a lot of background work for the assessment tasks, which is developing a strategic marketing plan. And the other thing I do, this is the only slide I could find quickly, is with all my slides, I use like color-coded boxes. So on my slides, if there's anything there specifically relevant that useful for the students for their assessment tasks, I pop it in a yellow box like this. So when they're reviewing the recording and fast forwarding and making me talk even faster than I usually do, they can see, bam, there's that slide I need because for my assessment task. So it saves them time as well. Sometimes we go a bit off track. So it helps them when they're reviewing those recordings. So that's basically my top 3 tips. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Nicole. I have a couple of comments myself, and I'll see if other people want to jump on in. I think, firstly, I would also absolutely jump on the exemplar and modelling train in terms of how important it is, because you can't possibly have expectations around what a student's output, if you will, to come up with a fairly bland name for what they're doing, to look a certain way, to be a certain structure, without actually providing examples of what that looks like. So even if it's, we often get pulled into this kind of tension between spoon feeding versus modeling, for example, and how much is too much. But there are, of course, strategies to sort of mitigate that effect. So obviously, exemplars and modeling that are on song, but not for this with the same specifics, or that demonstrate the idea, but not necessarily the detail, or sections or segments thereof, etc. So, I mean, there are ways to wade through that. I think the other thing I picked up on there that I can't imagine having gone through my own sort of studies in an earlier life without having had a hard copy of things to basically draw all over. That was just simply a part. Now, I don't know whether that's a generational thing, and people can say that's not how students learn anymore. I don't know if that's the case, but I've certainly seen plenty of students in the libraries and elsewhere here doing exactly that thing. And when you look at how critical, we'll keep harping on about subject outlines here today, I'm sure, the information held within a subject outline has become, the exercise of printing out the section individual assessment information, and either doing it by yourself or with others, hopefully, if you get the opportunity, and pulling it apart like that, highlighting the important bits, drawing the relationships, is not only an incredibly valuable exercise from my perspective for a student, it's incredibly valuable to a teacher, because we don't often, at the time we need to be doing it, get the chance to reflect on, as you said, the language that's used, how sensical the instruction for a task is. Instead, it all goes into, again, that pressure cooker analogy, the 6 weeks before session is about to start, and getting the instruction for assessments put into place, without just trying to make sense of it as just something that we would put in front of someone else and expect them to be able to work through it. So the taking of notes, I think, would be great to bring back to your own kind of meetings and reflections on assessments after the fact as well. So those are my 2 takeaways.
Yeah, just jump in there too, especially as a sessional staff member. You often have a limited, they'll send you this subject outline and say, hey, do you want to have a quick look at the assessment tasks? But you're not really, you're doing that more or less in your own time. If how long's a piece of string, how much you're going to spend on it. So you've skimmed it. Yeah, that looks fine. And then it's when you actually then have to explain it to the students, then you think, now I've got to get my head around it. So make sure you are prepared to, what sort of rights you're likely to write on the assessment task before you do this. So it is a good way as a practitioner, to really understand, okay, what is this really about? And then it also gives you that time then to check with your subject convener and have those pre-assessment, pre-moderation sort of discussions. So yeah, it's very useful. And I'm very old school. Although I was trying to do it on Adobe the other day on the PDF comments and highlight a thing, but I still like to draw and write. And the students love texters. Bring in a whole box of texters. They go crazy over that. So, that and blue tack, but that's another session, I think. All right, I'll leave it there, Lachlan.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else in the meeting like to comment at that point on Nicole or Hayley's contribution to date at all? If not, I'm happy to keep moving through, and we can have further discussion.
I can build on from Nicole's presentation if you like, and just show you how I utilize the Padlet within my assessment tasks there within the I2 site.
Okay,
as
I'm
a
happy
way of
to do
probably
that.
put that as a learning material and maybe learning experiences under these 2 categories.
Okay, let me bring up your slot. Now, in keeping with the treasure map and the pirate analogy, I have been adding X's beneath the sections that people have been using. So Hayley was looking at assessment. Nicole was looking at a way that sort of encompassed all 3 to some extent. Brendan, which one are you looking at?
I'll do the learning materials and learning experiences. I'll incorporate that in my discussion, not so much the assessment. So
excellent. Okay, thank you for that.
No worries, because a lot of the time, I suppose the people will have the curriculum written for them as well, and you might not be in that development for the assessments, but yeah, like Nicole was alluding to, we've got to teach it, and sometimes that can be really, really difficult. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'll get rid of all my. Okay, what I thought I might do is I'll just pull up my I2 site on one of the subjects that we had last session. So you can actually see where I've incorporated a bit of extra information for the students here as well. So as I was discussed earlier, like a lot of the content gets created and then we're responsible to be able to go in and to deliver this there as well. So the way that I like to learn is I'm very visual. I don't really I find it very difficult to listen to people speak to me and take on what they're saying there as well. So as a result of that, when we ask people to look at the assessment item, I thought of how can I try and incorporate this question here that we've got them to be able to write within the I2 site and within the learning material there as well. So the solution that I'm able to come up with is that I tried to make it as interactive as possible on this site here. So people have access to good information, good reading materials, and are able to learn the expected learning outcomes of what's required. And we always I'm actually from the faculty of nursing, so we always like to try and make different mediums available for people to learn. And so then as we go through, the way that I was able to incorporate the discussion, and this is an online subject, so a lot of the students are on an online model as opposed to being face-to-face in a classroom. So I thought, what better than to actually try and use Padlet there as a way to engage our students there as well. So this first activity here, this mindfulness activity, is this subject in caring science brings in mindfulness into nursing practice. But I was just getting them to get their head around how Padlets work, and so that they could then quickly post a really quick video of what's going on. So this enables them to just click this little link here to be able to put in the discussion there as well. And if you like, you can actually make it bigger and it opens up into a separate tab where you can then get a really good visual effect about what's going on there as well. Because as adult learners, like we learn from each other, we teach off each other. And so the more that the students hopefully can facilitate that engagement with each other, the sense of community can be created, and hopefully that they'll be able to help themselves. So that's the initial Padlet that I would have there. And so then when they progress through the different modules, the two questions that we try and teach, and nursing's very hands-on. We love looking after people. We love caring for people. When it comes to theory and trying to embrace theory concepts, that's when we start losing a few of our nursing students, because they've enrolled nurses potentially for a few years. And so they've just come back into the academic world. So we've got to try and get them to rethink more a bit of an academic language as opposed to a practical application when on the wards there as well. So to do this, this is where we had two concepts that really needed to be explained and to discuss through the teaching of the assessment item. And I felt the best way that we were able to do this was through these different activities of around the question here as well. So I'll just open this one up here. So the case study, we would use a prescribed text to give us our case study here. But what we're doing is we're exploring the links. This is the question between the processes of caring science and clinical reasoning through a scenario. So the scenario is here on the left-hand side that the students are able to access. And then I was able to incorporate our clinical reasoning cycle in the above Padlet at the top here. And then if we scroll across, you can see the 1 to 8 written there for the clinical reasoning. And then I got the students to then show me how through their learning, caring science could be applied to a key aspect within the scenario. So the key aspect here, and then had them putting in then the caring science. And I thought this was really good. It got people talking, it got a good discussion happening amongst the group, and it moved us away then from being very clinical focused in what we're doing in our interpretation to allow us to incorporate some other aspects of people's care that we may not be clinical. So thinking about their social situation or even where they come from, and then allowing them to maybe incorporate that into their discussion. And so I really like this. I got positive feedback from the students because it's a little bit more engaging for them. And rather than, I suppose, having activities written throughout your I2 site, it's a way that you can then have students come in and you can see them actually doing some of the work. And then as a teacher, I like that because I can see then people engaging and going, okay, good, I've got a bit of people here involved in my discussions there as well. And then obviously on from that, we would create our online Zoom meetings, trying to keep them nice and simple in one location that people can access. And within that, I would try and utilize the academic skills team and the library team to come in, provide us a bit of an education around our assessment items, and then offer a drop-in session after hours for people to have face-to-face contact with myself there as well. I was through I suppose being online, I thought maybe we could be a bit creative, and I thought maybe we could offer some sessions after hours. But then through discussions with different team members, I found that like it's not something that we can always guarantee that an academic is able to offer after hours tutorials or teaching. So this is the creation of that drop-in session, is that for people who are potentially working or want to have to engage with the academic, they can do through the drop-in session. And then I would have my tutorials obviously during business hours there as well. But as I mentioned, this Padlet I found really good way to create a discussion forum, sense of community for the cohort, and allowed the students then to talk to each other, because people might be able to explain it differently with each other. And so through the course of the subject, each time we did an activity around the Padlet, I'd have different students have almost like these little aha moments where they're like, oh yeah, cool, I understand the concept now, I understand the question there as well. And that could be coming from potentially a fellow student providing a bit of input there into the discussion. So yeah, I just thought I'd just show you how I've incorporated then the Padlet into the activity. So like I said, rather than having just these tutorial activities, I tried to make that activity more hands-on on the I2 site, in linking the students together so that they can see each other's response. So yeah, hope you can utilize that through your teaching.
Thanks, Brendan. I think yeah, the possibilities with Padlet and its different formats that they have, and they generally release a new format every 6 months or so as well that you can utilize with the walls. But the shelf format that you were showing there, I like, and I have problems with at the same time. It's a really interesting one because it does allow you to have obviously contribution within sort of refined kind of areas. So you had your different parts of your cycle, one after the other, with the students able to contribute. The problem I have with it is to do with the real estate on the page, because it squishes things up. And then that sometimes you lose a bit of that kind of effectiveness of the medium a little bit, even when you go full screen with it. But it's a trade-off because of there aren't other Padlet formats that allow you to make contributions like that within those defined areas and create that kind of sequence. You know, the timeline looks good, but you can't contribute underneath kind of the headings, for example. So yeah, absolutely. I love what you've done there.
And the other advantage with it too is that when we have a tutorial, we can also edit that as well. So we can tidy it up through the course of the subject as well. So it's almost essentially a live document there.
Yeah, I wondered to what extent as well. I'm assuming that you clear it for your next session, for example, before you use it again.
Correct. Yeah.
And so does that mean that you kind of have to reset
changes.
explaining how it's going to be used?
No, so I suppose it gets reset at the end of each session there as well. So I suppose the explanation hopefully is in the tablet itself, but it does take you are right, it takes a little while to get the students engaged on that explanation and using it, and hence that's why the first activity was a very simple way of using it, so that they felt encouraged to be able to utilize it. And as we progressed through, it kind of stepped up a little bit each time about what additional input could be used.
And you can't break it, basically.
No.
You can't break Padlet. It's pretty much foolproof.
And it's almost like electronic brainstorming as well.
It's more fun than discussion boards.
Well, I
they're
think
coming
so
back,
too,
Nicole.
yeah.
They're coming back, discussion
Are they?
boards. No,
Oh.
no, they're not.
Oh, phew.
But just read some article somewhere. They'll tell you that they are, I'm sure. All right, moving things along. We're tracking pretty well. We have 2 speakers left for today's session. So with that in mind, I'm going to next introduce Kim Bailey from the Centre for Law and Justice. And Kim, I'm hoping that you can tell us up front which of these 3 areas you'll be looking at.
Well, good morning. I guess, well, I was going to sort of focus in on learning experience and learning materials, but it does touch a little on assessment. So I'll predominantly focus on those 2, and you'll see a little bit about assessment too.
All right. If you stray too far over that way, I'll give you an X under there as well, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Would you like to share your screen and I'll stop
That
doing
sounds
mine?
good, thank you. Yep. Okay, so I thought what I might do is take you to my subject site. That might be possibly the best way to demonstrate what I wanted to talk about. And I teach undergraduate law, teach a number of the Priestley 11 subjects, which, like Hayley, they're mandatory, content-heavy subjects. Some of them have the potential to be extraordinarily boring. And it's a purely online degree, and our students are your very typical students in terms of demographics. So first in family, tertiary education, usually mature age, not always, but usually working people juggling caring responsibilities and all sorts of things. That's the reason that they are studying online, because they don't have any other options usually. And the usual experience, I guess, too, of online learning for them is that it's socially isolating. It's difficult in online tutorials when you have cohorts of 70 to 100 to get helpful conversation, particularly in making meaning between large volumes of content that you're expecting them to read individually and then come to tutorials to discuss in a period of 1.5 hours at the most. And then also relating how that content is going to feed into their assessment can be a challenge. So there's been a couple of strategies that we've trialed and adopted over the past 3 years in law that have gotten some quite good traction, I think, and I wanted to show you what they are. So the first is weekly study guides. Now, this sounds a little crazy, but actually has been really popular. And I started this in a first year subject because I found that those study skills that we assume students have, they did not have in terms of organising their note taking. For me, in terms of also correct referencing of their notes, because we have online open book exams, which I must say I'm not a fan of, but have a very high academic integrity risk in terms of cutting and pasting material that's not properly referenced and therefore falling foul of plagiarism, which is a very serious matter for law students because it can stop them being admitted later on. So helping them to structure their notes each week was something that I thought, actually, we need to go back to basics and we need to teach them constructively how to create study notes each week and to think about how they're digesting the material and making meaning between the material and the upcoming assessment that they have to do. So what I did for every week, each topic that we were covering, I would give them key concepts. Some of these are informed by learning outcomes, but some of them are not, in that these key concepts are what you're going to be examined on or assessed on. These are the topic areas that are really important that you need to know and be able to explain to yourself and have clear and good notes on them. And I would actually model for them in tutorials what good study notes might look like, showing them a variety of types, Cornell method, and showing them how they can reference that with integrity as well by supporting. So for example, that first concept, they could, or a later concept, they could actually give you a case or a piece of legislation and they could reference that correctly, or they could give a definition and explain to them why cutting and pasting that definition off a website, as distinct from reading the material and putting it in your own words, could be fraught with risk for them and also isn't a great way of actually learning the content. So we also gave them a to-do list. And I know this sounds crazy for adult learners and for learners in law, but sometimes navigating the vast quantities of material, because our Interact 2 sites are frequently full. And there's the online learning topics, there's interactives in the online learning, there's their textbooks that they have, and then we introduce them to other sources through the law library. And they sort of think information overload where do I go each week and what's my method for operating. So that's what the to-do list is informed by. So it's really, you know, this is in order of importance of what I want you to do this week. And it's not to say that the additional material that's there for you isn't going to help you with assessment or isn't important. It's just that this is what I think is your, if you're time poor, this is your hit list for the week. So one of the, obviously reading their text is really critical, but we have embedded podcast lectures in the subject as well, which have been phenomenally popular. I used to do video lectures through Panopto. I don't anymore because podcasts are much more popular. We use Anchor FM. 40 minutes max on key concepts. So I'm not regurgitating concept. I'm actually talking about these key concepts, and I'm frequently relating them back to the legal profession and what's going on in litigation. So this subject is essentially how to sue people in civil courts. And so I'm pulling down cases. I mean, you know, the universe has been incredibly kind to me because this year we had the Ben Roberts-Smith defamation trial unfolding, and I could access the online court file. And I would suggest to students in the podcast, go and have a look at this document. This relates to this key concept this week. And last year we had the Christian Porter defamation trial. So, you know, it's not hard to relate the material to the profession as well. So we're telling them, you know, quite explicitly, this is what you need to do. And I introduce this to them in an orientation lecture before session begins, saying to them, if you want to succeed in this subject, here's what you need to do every week. And I say to them, these key concepts, if you've got all of those under your belt, that's what's in your end of year exam. So that's what you need to know. And they know that if it's not there, then, you know, it's additional information and it doesn't necessarily build to a learning outcome. We also relate each week's material to an upcoming assessment task so that they can see the explicit connection between their learning. And in some instances, I will actually also suggest to them different things that they might like to do. So in another subject at the moment, which is a first year subject, I have suggested to them a table that they might like to complete as they're doing their readings in preparation for a particular assessment task, and modelling that for them in the assessment and skills section. So study guides have been really helpful and very popular, and a lot of students have said that because of that, they've changed the way that they're taking notes and changed their approach to the learning content and the information that's available. So I think they've been quite effective, particularly for first years. But interestingly, my second years and third years keep asking for study guides, and I sort of think, aren't you past that yet? But no, they're not. The other thing that we do that ties in with these weekly to-do lists as well is that you'll see here the third item, in your study group, discuss the questions I have for topic 1 that's on the discussion board. Online study groups are another really key tool for learning in law. They are optional and they are not accessible. So they are opt-in opportunities, groups of a maximum of 8 that you self-assign yourself to. So if you have an existing relationship as a student with other students that you might have met at the intensive schools, or that you know are studying with you, then you can choose to pair up with those other students, or you can just bravely join a group. But these groups basically consist of 8 students. They are provisioned through Blackboard. They have a file exchange where the students can share documents. They have a group discussion board that's unique to that group. And they have a group email tool as well. And it's really fascinating. What we've noticed with these groups, because we've been doing them now for 3 years, is that they are increasing retention, they are increasing progression, and they are enhancing academic integrity. And the reason for that is it's part of the holistic strategy. So it's just one more tool in the toolbox as a teacher. But I will say to them quite explicitly, in your study groups this week, I want you to discuss these issues ready for your assessment task, and then explicitly explain to them that discussing that is perfectly okay for assessment, but obviously sharing notes together would be collusion or a risk of plagiarism or colluding with someone else. So please don't do that. Don't Google share or don't create notes. But by all means, talk about these things together, because the power of more than one mind is a great learning tool, and you need to collaborate because that's what you do in the legal profession. So we're scaffolding the groups with explicit instructions around assessment and academic integrity, and we're weekly giving them problems that they solve in their study groups before they come along to our tute. What we do notice about these groups is that they very quickly go offline, which is fine. So they don't stay in the subject site. They will go on WhatsApp, they will go off on their own Zoom meetings. And I'm always there to back them up, but I don't moderate their discussion boards, and I don't involve myself in their meetings unless they invite me to. And I make it clear I'm available, but this is your space. And it's been really, really helpful and very successful. So.
Thanks, Kim. I'm going to have to pull us up
Yep.
there so we can hand over to Kartika before she needs to go as well. But I think we'll certainly jump back and talk about some of those ideas that you've unpacked there. So thank you very much.
No problem.
Now, Kartika, you're last but definitely not least. Can I ask you to identify for me which of the three areas you're going to have a look at this morning?
I think it will mostly be assessments, but I'll also touch on learning materials and learning experiences very briefly.
All right. Well, let's give you all three then. Would you like to share your screen?
Yes, but after giving a bit of a background, I'll share my screen after that. So,
Sure.
Hi everyone, and I'm Kartika. I'm from the School of Computing, Maths and Engineering, and particularly from that engineering piece. Engineering school is quite different, I believe, because we don't have classroom lectures or exams. We do project-based learning, and students are at their workplace after the first 18 months. And they learn theory through on-demand, on-time learning platform, which is called Realize It, and we call it Topic Tree. So the subject that I'm going to talk about is workplace learning subject in the second year. So it is their second placement. It is distant, online, and so it is called performance planning and review subject, in which they set their goals in professional development. They review their goals and they reflect on their professional development at workplace. So I'll share my screen now. So this subject was initially handed over to me in just 1 week, and I had no idea what it was all about. And it's a year-long subject. And after going through that subject in one round, I realized that there are several challenges with this subject, being workplace, being distant, ensuring academic integrity. Student engagement was a big part of it. And the cohort was very diverse. Some were mature age students with years of experience at workplace, and some were school leavers. So how do I design an assessment which helps all of them? And it need to be really personalized, because the workplace is very different, even though everyone is doing civil engineering. The opportunities at workplace are very different. There was no ownership of learning as such, even though they used to develop their own professional goals and they used to reflect on their professional development. It was rather very mechanical, and there was no ownership. And there are academic and industry mentors in this subject, but their role was quite vague when it was handed over to me. And mostly the industry mentors had the upper hand, and they were directing their professional development in a way that they satisfy all their workplace requirements. So it was quite difficult, and the learning resources for reflection for the students were usually set by the subject coordinator at the very beginning of the subject, like leadership development or having motivation at workplace, communication, things like that. And what happened was that the students could not relate to anything, and they were very untimely, or they were not relevant at all to their workplace. So there were several challenges, and this is what my brain looked like at the end of that first year of running that subject. So how do I start? Where do I go? And that's when I fortunately attended the interactive oral community of practice. And I realized that interactive oral was a great way to change the entire assessment strategy of this subject. Essentially, we need at least 4 assessments in order to have that touch points and ensure that the students are learning at their workplace. And I started designing the assessment from the back, like a backward design strategy, and I started with assessment 4. So assessment 4 is about, are you ready for the next destination? So after the 380, which is the current subject, they go on either to do 480, which is a master's level subject, or they graduate with a Bachelor of Engineering. So in either way, their expectations are quite different. Their expectations are quite high in terms of professional development. So I thought that, okay, that interactive oral piece could fit well into assessment 4. And the scenario that I chose was a job interview. So in this job interview, I act as the interviewer, and they are the interviewee, and they are explaining to me their professional development, how they can fit into the workplace, how they can apply their learning to a different scenario, which I will be asking them at that point of time. So that interactive oral job interview scenario was assessment 4, and to attend in that interactive oral that job interview, they need to have a response to selection criteria document ready with their professional development saying how I fit well into your workplace. So to ensure that response to selection criteria and that professional development thing, I started off with the first assessment where they assess their placement and understand the opportunities available at the placement. They do a self-assessment. How are they? What are their skills, professional skills, and where they want to develop? And then they identify some capabilities and responsibilities, and then develop the goals. So this way, their goals are very personal, very much aligned with the workplace, and they have some ownership of their goals in that way. And in the second assessment, it was about reflection on their professional capabilities. Earlier, they were reflecting on selected topics like leadership or communication or motivation. But this time, they were really reflecting on their professional development based on the learning outcomes in that learning outcome areas. And then I used actually discussion board, and it was very interesting to see that they had active discussion on the discussion board, and they were helping their peers with professional development, their challenges, helping each other and sharing resources as well. And at this point, I should also mention that this helped me to understand which learning material is relevant for the particular challenge that the cohort is facing. And then I could share that through the Leganto tool. So I used Leganto as well very effectively in this case. And academic and industry mentors had their particular role in helping them align with the learning outcomes or professional development, and their roles were much more defined in this case. And in assessment 3, they self-assessed against their goals, how they were progressing, updated their learning and goal management plan so that they were ready for the 4th assessment, which is the job interview. So they have been preparing themselves all through the way for the 4th assessment, which is expressing their professional development in a written and oral format. So that's what I wanted to share. And the formal feedback is yet to be received because it happens in December, I think, because it's a workplace learning subject. And the anecdotal feedbacks were very positive, and students mentioned that they were able to make sense out of the assessment related to their workplace, related to learning, and they were doing something which is very connected. They felt connected to the cohort. And one of them also mentioned that they could use the assessment in a modified way for the next job interview. So that was very positive. That's all I wanted to share. And I think I must run to the other meeting.
Yeah, no problem, Kartika. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And I think that that idea of actually being able to come out of an assessment with an artifact or an object or a lesson that you could use somewhere else, heaven forbid that we might actually get some use out of it beyond the learning experience. That sounds like something that everyone, can aspire to, I think. Doesn't happen that often. So well done. And I would say also that we need to give a big thank you to everyone that has taken time out this morning to share their own practice, their own experiences and strategies as we try and help students make meaning out of the craziness that can be learning either online or face-to-face, etc., and with such a diverse cohort as we have here. So acknowledging that we are over time at this point in time, I would like to say a big thank you to Kim Bailey, Hayley McEwen, Kartika Pillai, Brendan Tyrosh, and Nicole Mitchell for coming out this morning and sharing some of their own insights. I think this has been a really interesting session. I think I could personally go on and have another hour or so discussing and sharing ideas. So we are definitely going to do this again. We might unpack it a bit more, but thank you all, and we will see you at the next session.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. I learned a lot. Very, very inspiring stuff going on. It's great to see. So